A narcissistic relationship is like living in a totalitarian state where you are always being censored and observed. You try not to say the thing that will get you in trouble, but those damned goalposts move every day. To me, confusion might be one of the signature hallmark qualities of narcissistic abuse. Because otherwise, narcissistic abuse looks like a lot of other things. It looks a little bit like post-traumatic stress, looks like anxiety, but the confusion is something so unique to the experience of a person who's in a narcissistic relationship. They don't know which way is up. They don't know, they're being gaslighted. They're just confused all the time. So because of that, it makes it really hard for people to get help even in therapy, because in some ways they're so confused that they're having trouble even explaining the narcissistic relationship, and if the therapist doesn't get narcissistic abuse, it can actually make things harder for someone. So some of the comments jumped out at me because they really put a finer point on how this confusion piece worked. One of the comments is a great one because this brings up a theme I've talked about in another video. This person writes, I started recording every conversation on my phone just to prove to myself what he said. Ended up keeping them for reminders to break from the trauma bonding and realize that they could be helpful in court. And then it says, she was right, or he or she, I don't know if it's a man or a woman. You are absolutely right. Never tell them you know. I made that mistake before I heard this advisory, and I thought for sure if he knew, he would want to change. Okay, so this comment brings up two really important themes. People are confused in narcissistic relationships because of the gaslighting, because their reality is constantly being doubted. They're also confused because some days the narcissist can actually seem like a nice person, other days they're not. At breakfast they might be nice, by lunchtime they may be awful, and so it's almost like you're living with this thing that explodes from time to time, and it's not even always clear why. So number one, the need to record conversations. I don't even care whether you record them or not. It's feeling the need to do it. To me, that's the ringer. That tells me somebody is very likely, 90% likely, they're in a narcissistic relationship. Why? Because you have been questioned. I never said that. I never did that. I never agreed to do that. And you're like, yes, you did. And so you start recording it. And the first time you play that recording back for the narcissist, they go berserk. They go crazy. They're like, you're so petty. Really? Is that what we're doing now? We're recording things in this relationship? I'm so glad this person tied it to that feelings of confusion. When you feel driven to record things, that's what's happening for you. You're actually trying to get a handle on this confusion. And two for the price of one on this comment. This person went on to say they made the mistake of calling this person out as a narcissist. And obviously, not only did it not work out, this person had the hope that the narcissist would change. It's not going to happen. So that's a great cautionary tale. Another comment. One thing that really confused me was being told I was playing the victim every time I cried. Person then says in their comment, okay, I'm a very sensitive crybaby, but my tears were genuine and I was hurting from being yelled at and dismissed every day. That's when I was like, right there, that comment struck me. This person is calling themselves a very sensitive crybaby. That, to me, is the kind of what we almost call linguistic programming, the language this person now holds on to because they've been gaslighted and confused so many times. I'm guessing this person isn't a so-called sensitive crybaby. I'm guessing this person is just really frustrated and very confused and happens to express emotion through tears. But that self-gaslighting also gets highlighted in this person's confusion. And so he or she goes on to say, but yeah, it really leaves me second-guessing myself and my own motives. I felt very disconnected from my emotions and I feel shame and guilt when I cry. The other reason this comment is so striking is that you may leave your narcissistic relationship. You may leave the gaslighting behind, okay? But look what happens. It leaves this echo that sort of follows you into your life. After having been with a narcissist, a parent, a partner, even a close friend or in the workplace, their voice calling you sensitive, why are you always crying, what's wrong with you, can then evoke emotions, this person called them shame and guilt, which I think are pretty much classical, evoke emotions like shame and guilt, when you appropriately show strong emotions elsewhere. As a therapist, I can't tell you how many times a client of mine has started crying in a session, which to me, I only want to hold safe space for them to do that. And you know what they do? Because I work with survivors of narcissistic abuse. 8 times out of 10, they apologize. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for crying. Sorry. That's one of the most beautiful things in the world, that somebody would feel safe in a space to be able to express themselves. So that comment was really on point. Next comment really jumped out at me. For me, one of the hardest parts of growing up with a narcissistic mother was when strangers would tell me, "You're so lucky to have such an amazing mother," because they would talk to her in the middle of a store. I remember feeling so much anger because I saw right through the game she was playing, going back to the idea of being a truth teller, but that didn't keep me from second guessing and gaslighting myself. How many of you, and drop this one in the comments, how many of you have gone through this? That you have a world-class narcissist in your life, a mom or a dad or a partner or anyone, and people stop you and say, "Oh, hey, yeah, I saw your mom. Oh, you're so lucky that's your mom. You're so lucky that's your dad. You're so lucky that's your spouse." And you want to say, "Oh my goodness," like it feels like a huge gaslighting conspiracy that these people can't see it, and on top of that, are rubbing your face into it. You can see again how that can drive the confusion. In fact, a lot of people will say, enough people have come up to me and said, "Oh, you guys, you're so lucky. Your mom is just a nice person," that the person will say, "I think I've lost all grip of the reality. I must be a bad person because I think my mother is a horrible narcissist." And so that concept for people, just like this woman is put in her comment, or "I think my husband is a horrible person," and everyone's saying, "Oh, you're so lucky to be married to him." It's a very confusing space. And I love that this person sent this comment in, because I think that highlights that concept of confusion where you're like, "Now I got this figured out. This is toxic. I'm being gaslighted. This person has no empathy." And yet you go out into public and people are saying, "Lucky you." Oh, no, not so lucky. The challenge then becomes to not feel the need to school that person in that moment, because you know how they're probably going to view you, not like, "Oh, well, thanks for awakening me to the fact that your mom's a narcissist," but rather they'll say, "Angry," and they'll view you as somewhat toxic, and the game will go on. At those times, you can sort of quickly get yourself out of the conversation and file that away, because this person's judgment may not be entirely there, and they sure as heck, anyone who thinks the narcissist in your life is a world-class person isn't seeing it clearly. Raise your hand if you've ever felt guilty in your narcissistic relationships. Drop it in the comments. Raise your hand by yourself. Most people in narcissistic relationships feel guilty. Why? Because you think everything that's going wrong in the relationship is your fault. Every problem in the relationship is your fault. You feel guilty for labeling someone or thinking about someone you care about or is in your family as narcissistic. You feel guilty that maybe you aren't trying hard enough. You feel guilty that you might have said something or shared something sort of bad or negative about the narcissistic person to someone else in your world. You feel guilty that you can't make it work. You feel guilty that you can't figure it out. You feel guilty for not being good enough or being not good enough. You feel guilty for considering leaving the relationship. You feel guilty for leaving them. You feel guilty for breaking up a family. Please feel free to add any others I may have missed. You feel guilty for no longer talking to a parent. You get the idea. Guilt and shame are primary emotions for survivors in these relationships. It's the sense that you are doing something bad, that you are bad, and on top of that, you have to carry around the projected shame of the narcissistic person. And you also don't want people to see what a mess the relationship is, or the shame that comes from feeling an ick about a situation in your life that other people don't see clearly, and leaves you wondering like, well, no one else sees it this way, so maybe it's me. So let's go back to the guilt, because I say this as a therapist who has worked with clients experiencing these relationships for decades, is that guilt is the emotion that the people who are in or have been in narcissistic relationships probably most share as a primary emotion, for all the reasons I listed. Now, one place where the guilt can hit hard is the guilt that comes from believing that what the narcissistic person is saying about you is plausible. Like, they're saying that I'm a bad person. They're saying that I'm not nice to other people. They're saying that I'm selfish. Hear that enough, it starts to feel like the truth. You wonder, maybe they're right. I mean, I do sometimes choose to do something that's important to me. Ugh, I feel so bad. But guilt is universal for anyone who is in one of these narcissistic relationships. It doesn't matter whether the thing that you did in the relationship is actually bad. What matters is that you think or believe that you did a bad thing. But the reality matters less than the fact that your guilt is what allows the relationship to persist. When we feel guilty, we'll often stay in the relationships. When we feel guilty, we'll often respond in a way that works for the narcissistic people or for other people too. And when we feel guilty, we think that we're as bad as them and their behavior. Guilt is the glue that keeps the narcissistic relationship together. I don't buy the BS that a person in a narcissistic relationship is a masochist, or that anyone can leave a situation that they don't like. It's just not how attachment works. It's not how psychological safety and trauma work. It's not how basic human needs like belongingness work. And it's not how reality works. The psyche is going to always find a way to stay connected to relationships, even if they are unsafe at times, because attachment is that important. And especially if we're never able to build secure attachments. And what we may perceive as safe and as being a part of something, it may not be, but we stay attached to it. And the more that trauma has accumulated over a lifetime, the more safety-oriented our attachment systems become. Our decisions are more primitive and more safety-oriented rather than choices based on higher-order stuff such as respect or reciprocity or staying attached to someone with similar values. The more disruptions in attachment that we have had, the more our attachment styles may be less secure, more insecure, perhaps more anxious, more avoidant, which can make relationships a very fraught space and give us sort of more grist for the guilt mill, saying things like, well, I'm the one who starts acting crazy when he stops talking to me. I'm the one who becomes distant when I sense that they're lying to me. When survivors tell me they feel guilty, I work with them to determine what the function of that guilt is. First, we break down the feeling and what the bad thing they did was. I mean, we feel guilty because we think we did something bad, right? It's amazing how many survivors of narcissistic relationships believe that the bad thing that they did is that they had angry, critical thoughts. They didn't even express the thoughts. It's just that they had a thought in their head that was negative about the narcissistic person. Then we start breaking down how the guilt gets you stuck because it means that you are bad too, that you are part of the problem. The guilt, in an odd way, means that the relationship gets to persist because the idea of leaving one of these relationships can be terrifying, both for psychological reasons, for realistic reasons, and frankly, all the other reasons that leaving any relationship can be scary. So if we feel guilty, we can just focus on our bad stuff and not have to start taking on the other stuff like radical acceptance, which also brings up tons more guilt, radical awareness, realistic expectations. To see the relationship clearly can feel like we're being a bad person. But if we can view that guilt as a blockade, as a big gate that keeps us stuck, then we have a greater chance of knocking it down. Addressing the guilt doesn't mean that you leave the relationship. Addressing the guilt means that you see it clearly and you have your eyes wide open on why you are staying. Because your reasons are yours and they make sense to you. It could be children, it could be money, it could be culture, it could be realistic fears, it could be structural issues like immigration status. It doesn't change the narcissistic person's behavior one bit. But when you can see it clearly, you can be aware of what is not healthy in this relationship, what behaviors are not okay. You can stop taking responsibility for someone else's bad behavior. Listen, we take responsibility for other people's shit when we have to stay connected to them. It gives us a greater sense of control. It's not easy, but it can start cracking through the guilt to see it clearly. The guilt as glue model really applies when this is a family relationship we're talking about. Children feel terrible when they even have a passing thought that their parent is awful, especially when they're young. And that can start the guilt attachment cycle. The guilt means that the child almost naturally and reflexively takes on the shame of the parent's bad behavior and carries that shame and guilt and internalizes it into a structure of, I'm bad. The biggest problem with a lot of the ways we talk about narcissism is that it comes at the narcissistic relationship from the point of view of, you gotta leave. Listen, in an ideal world, you could. I mean it. That's an ideal aspirational thing. But for a lot of reasons, real reasons, we can't. We don't live in utopia. So, not even close. So understanding the function of guilt actually matters more if you're going to stay, because living in eternal guilt is not good for you. Guilt keeps you feeling small. It holds you back from being your true self, from aspiring, from trying new things, from trusting yourself, from connecting with new and healthy people, all the stuff that's essential to healing. Guilt leaves you feeling as though you are bad, that you're a person who does bad things. When you see the guilt, when you start realizing that some of the function of that guilt becomes almost like a way to stay in it and recognize that you actually can have something called agency, that you can make the choice to stay, but have your eyes open, that becomes a different game. You now understand what this is. It still sucks, don't get me wrong, but it takes a different toll on you. Once you see it clearly, say this sucks, but you may be able to seek out different supports, ways of coping. When you are aware and feel like you're making an active choice to stay, rather than living in guilt and that passively keeping you stuck. Passively staying is not good for you. Agency, saying, okay, I'm staying for these reasons, is healthier. Think about any narcissistic relationship you have been in or are in, and think about the guilt you felt. To what degree, now that we're unpacking it this way, how did this guilt function? Did it block you from seeing the relationship clearly? Did it keep you stuck? Did it create this sense of false equivalence in your mind that I'm bad too? Maybe I'm the problem too, so we two problem people can stay together? Seeing guilt as this really cruel, sadistic glue can help us understand why this theme of guilt, this dynamic of guilt, this emotion of guilt is so central to these relationships. You have to remember that you can see a narcissistic relationship clearly and stay. You can see it clearly and you can go. Guilt can keep you stuck, and it may leave you doubting if you did the right thing by leaving. That's the challenge with guilt. It's like taking your glasses off and you can't see clearly. All of that to say that taking on the narcissistic person's shame and believing that we are the one who is behaving badly is a relationship for getting sick, for getting stuck, for abandoning ourselves and making our choices not from a place of agency and awareness, but from fear and confusion. If you can stay in a if you feel like I've chosen to stay in this narcissistic relationship, and I understand what I'm doing. I want to be under the same roof as my kids. Right now, financially, it's untenable. in my culture, this is going to cut me off from other supports. You're aware of what you're doing and you see it clearly. I'm not saying this is an easy line to walk. It's very exhausting. Caring for yourself as you go through this becomes very important. But it's very different than, we're both bad. And that's why I'm saying you're selling yourself a false story. And that really takes a toll on your health. I am not enough. This is the mantra of everyone who is or has ever been in a narcissistic relationship. And it doesn't matter what kind of relationship it is. It can be your parent, partner, workplace, sibling, friend. If you have enough protracted contact with a narcissistic person, you will feel as though you are not enough, whatever the hell that really means. And a lot of this connects to self-blame and shame and hope. The basic idea is that if I was enough, then maybe this relationship would work better or they wouldn't be angry. Because the core challenge of the narcissistic relationship is that sometimes it does work well. And when it works well, it can feel really good. And then throw in there the nostalgia and the hope that it could go back to those easy love bomb days. And we take all the bad moments of the narcissistic relationship and we ask ourselves a question, maybe it's us. Remember, it's not you. Now, the narcissistic person and their gaslighting also reinforces this idea that there is something wrong with us. And presto changeo, we start to believe we are not enough. The earlier in our lives and the more developmentally impactful the narcissistic relationship, namely a parent, the more the sense of I am not enough gets baked into our sense of self. To have a narcissistic parent means that this is who we become. Because a narcissistic parent largely parents through domination and control. The child is forever on their back foot. The child is only attuned to when it is convenient for the parent and is viewed as a problem otherwise. And the child internalizes the, if I was enough then, fill in the blank. If I was enough then, they would talk to me more. They wouldn't yell at me. They would protect me. They would play chutes and ladders with me. They would be proud of me. They would pick me up on time from school. They wouldn't scream at mom. You get the idea, right? The I am not enough then becomes sort of a dark fellow traveler, pushing us to perfectionism, procrastination, selling ourselves short, believing we have to earn love by doing more and more and more, feeling we have to prove ourselves to be loved or even liked, not taking advantage of or even being willing to aspire to opportunities because we feel foolish or unqualified, tolerating toxic relationships because we think this is as good as it gets. And I'm not enough anyhow, so why could a relationship or how could a relationship be better? This is all I deserve. This is all I'm going to get. I am not enough is a lifelong cascade of silencing our voices, not reaching our potential, and never really reaching in and living in our true or authentic selves. But rather, it's some limited version of us that allows us to stay connected and attached to the narcissistic person or system. And as long as we walk around sort of diminished and taking on the responsibility for all of the problems, then it all works. Now, obviously, I'm going to say that this is not true. Everyone is enough. And if everyone understood that, then frankly, this narcissism problem would go away because then even the narcissistic people wouldn't feel full of shame and insecurity. But that's not going to happen, so this problem is here to stay. And of course, this all boils down to whatever the hell enough means. But because this I am not enough is such a basic identity schema level thing, it isn't always easy to change. So let's shed a different light on this, because this is not about you not being enough. That assumption is a distortion of reality. You are enough. You just aren't able to lean into that as long as you're going to try to stay connected to the narcissistic people. The not enoughness, however, your sense of being not enough, it relates to a true reality of the narcissistic relationship. Because the real deal is that you will never be able to do enough in this relationship. And actually, I think that is the origin of all this not enoughness. But doing and being are very different things. Being is our existence, our identity, our sense of self, a sort of permanent sense of, I will never be enough, while doing is behavior, it's activity. So what does trying to do enough in a narcissistic relationship look like? First, it's the things we do actually do in the relationship, for example. These could be things like keeping the entire household running by ourselves and rarely, if ever, relying on the narcissistic person to help. It could be solving all the small problems in life yourself and never bringing them to the attention of the narcissistic person, whatever that relationship is in your life. It could be doing things like losing weight, changing our appearance, trying to look younger, stronger, cooler, hipper, chicer, sexier. It could be make more money, get them gifts, do nice things for them, take them on big vacations. It could be tell them what they want to hear, praise them, cheer them on, encourage them, appease them, reassure them, even when you don't feel psychologically safe and none of this is ever done for you. And it's the things we don't do. We hold back on sharing problems, our feelings, our needs. We don't give genuine feedback out of fear of their rage. We don't tell them the stuff happening in our lives or things that are important to us. You don't bring up topics that you know will set them off. So we do and we don't do these things with the goal of trying to do enough. You may set the unrealistic goal for yourself of, I am just not going to get it wrong today. The house will be clean. The headaches will be dealt with. I won't talk about anything that will set them off. I'll be cheerful. But narcissistic people are like finicky appliances. If you don't set the dial just right, it won't run right. I had a washer like that. And you don't know what sets them off. So you may get it just right one day, do all the right things, but don't realize that on that day, independent of you, they also saw a social media post that made them insecure. So when you say something as innocuous as, oh, hey, how you doing? Oh, my sister and her husband came back from vacation on Saturday, and I'm going to run by to give them their mail. Just that's all you're going to say. You may be hit back with a torrent of, your brother-in-law is an asshole, and you waste too much of your time doing stuff for them. And this may have happened, not because of you or your brother-in-law or your sister, but because the narcissistic person's angry because they learned today that their friend retired early and is always taking cool trips, and they saw that on social media. Again, this has nothing to do with your brother-in-law or your sister. It has to do with the narcissistic person feeling insecure. You had nothing to do with that social media post they saw. But that shame has to go somewhere, and bam, you can't get it just right. And so even the most nothing of a thing you did can take you back to, oh God, this is my fault. I shouldn't have said that. Folks, I grew up like this. One of our parents couldn't be available to us the way we wanted because the house had to be as clean as an operating room every single day. And after all that time and anxiety and cleaning and scrubbing and putting things away, we would sit through the tension at the dinner table about, oh God, the salt shaker isn't completely full, and live in fear of those criticisms, our heart sinking when we saw that salt shaker that wasn't full or the toy that we didn't put away. You cannot do enough in one of these relationships. It's not possible. In fact, something that really takes a toll on people in narcissistic relationships is comparison. You may look, for example, at another person's marriage and see that they aren't doing all the things that you have to do, and yet their spouse or partner is really nice to them and protects them and compliments them and is nice to them. So you wonder, I am doing so much more than my friend is doing, but I must not be doing enough because my partner doesn't treat me anywhere near how this person treats my friend. Your friend's healthier partner is noticing them and complimenting them, not because your friend is doing enough or is enough or doing more than you, but because their relationship may just be healthy. It isn't about enoughness. It's about the health of the relationship. You may have similar experiences and feelings when you've peered into non-narcissistic family systems of other people, where you've seen that family members can be supportive and encouraging, and you wonder, what am I doing wrong? Why doesn't my family react like this to me? What more do I need to do to make it feel a bit more like this? There is nothing more. You cannot do enough. The other family is healthier. That's it. It's not you. The title came from somewhere. A narcissistic relationship is like living in a totalitarian state where you are always being censored and observed. You try not to say the thing that will get you in trouble, but those damned goalposts move every day. The thing that gets you into trouble one day may not matter on another day, and vice versa. So you hold back, you censor yourself to avoid the punishments, to avoid the anger, to avoid the chaos. The goalposts move again, and it all feels unpredictable because the punishments and reactions are dictated by what's happening inside of the narcissistic person, because of the shame and the insecurity of the narcissistic person's fragile inner world. These relationships are a world of gotcha, where you can get 100 things in a row right, but the one thing that you do that sets them off, well, that's what you focus on. And frankly, probably what they focus on. You are attempting to do something impossible in the narcissistic relationship. You are trying to be all things to another person, which requires you to silence yourself and read their mind. Then I suppose if you could do that, be completely silent and read their mind all the time, then I suppose that would be doing enough. But since that's not possible, there's my point. It's not possible to do enough. This isn't about being enough. That makes the conversation too existential. It's about attempting to do enough, which is also impossible in a narcissistic relationship. I have watched people destroy and exhaust themselves to prove to themselves and the narcissistic person and the world that they could do it. They could be enough. They could win them over, that there was some version of enough. But doing this only leads to collapse for you, utter sacrifice that will get you nowhere. It can almost start to feel like a self-imposed challenge, like the narcissistic person is a puzzle that can be figured out, a code that can be cracked, a lock that can be picked. Houdini couldn't figure this shit out. So for years, we've socialized people to do this, to do enough, be enough with their parents, for wives to do this with their husbands, to be perfect, to have no needs, to have no wants, to be silent, to smile, to be grateful, and everything will be just fine. Ironically, even that utter subjugation and death of a person's soul in the name of a relationship is still not enough for the narcissistic person. Because it's not about you being enough, nor is it about the possibility of being able to do enough. There is no such thing. It's an impossible goal. You may even believe that if you communicate it clearly enough, write it out, reinforce it, repeat it. Nope, not even that is enough. I went through this recently in a mildly narcissistic relationship and recognized that while it felt brutally unfair, that I was having to do far more extra work, I had to really get to a place where I had to radically accept that there was literally no way to communicate because the other person was so entitled. Ironically, I am working more hours on the stuff I have to do because this person is too entitled to do it, and often wasting more money and paying for more help. But I'm actually now more at peace and in my body. And there's a cost to this. I don't feel connected to this person in the same way. Despite being tired, it's a different kind of tired. It's not the helpless tired of trying to make it work with someone narcissistic, but the tired of working hard. I will take that any day. Because once you give up on the fairness and the workarounds, once you give up on the fairness, the workarounds in narcissistic relationships can flow more smoothly. When you really see the narcissistic relationship for what it is, you can start to engage with it realistically. You stop trying for impossible targets like enough. You realize it was all just a paper tiger, that the relationship is hollow, and you may be working harder, but somehow it's a different kind of work, aligned with reality rather than false hope. And that sets you free from the distorted funhouse mirror. That is the narcissistic relationship. If you can see these dynamics clearly, slowly start setting yourself free. Stop trying to do and win them over or prove to yourself it can be done, and radically accept and see it for what it is. An issue that doesn't just come up in narcissistic relationships, but in any relationship where there may be someone whose behavior is a problem, but they aren't aware of it entirely. So narcissism is often a leading cause of this. But we may also see this with someone who is in any kind of relationship with someone who has stuff. And this stuff may also be circumstantial. They have lots of young children and they're having to juggle all of that. They have a very difficult work situation. They're having a health issue. This stuff could be psychiatric, the patterns and symptoms associated with a mental health diagnosis, a behavioral health issue, or it could be medical, a chronic health issue. This stuff could also be historical, a history of adversity, of trauma, or of significant grief and loss. Whatever a person's stuff is, and we've all had times when we've had stuff, it can mean that that person is preoccupied or don't notice what someone else needs or wants. Now, in some cases, for example, dementia, or someone living with a head injury or an acute medical issue, or even a developmental issue, that would mean that their ability to focus on someone else is either almost impossible or completely unrealistic. We know this. We have this information, and we, as a result, may interact with them accordingly. And as a result, we and the world at large will recognize that people who are caring for people under these circumstances would need their own support. If you are in this situation, you may know how exhausting it is. You do know how exhausting it is, but may also have people who encourage you to take care of you and recognize that you are, in fact, in a one-sided situation where you need support. There are sometimes even, public programs in place, like respite programs, that involve giving people support for a day here and there so that they can care for themselves. And then there is what comes up in narcissism and with other antagonistic personalities or other cases where it may not be full-blown narcissism or antagonism, but it may be high levels of entitlement. And then a sort of manipulative willingness to turn their situation into something where they feel entitled to have things the way they want them, entitled to your time, entitled to not do anything for anyone themselves, but expect to get that back from other people. Entitlement, interestingly, can also feel like it's a part of other issues for people too. For example, we may often see entitlement as part of the picture of addiction. The struggle then becomes that you may observe that the person that you're experiencing this with had a tough backstory or is going through a difficult time and is having a spell of bad luck, and you empathize with that. And this dynamic is very pronounced in relationships that people have with vulnerably narcissistic people. This asymmetry is the core of many narcissistic relationships. One person constantly attempting to understand the other person's history, point of view, experience, mood, health, and the narcissistic person never doing that for the other person, or almost never. It's a one-way street of you trying and trying and trying to empathize and understand and make sense of their behavior and overextending yourself and doing. But you never get it back. And this is the clincher. The narcissistic person could be doing these things. They have just constructed a manipulative narrative to get them off the hook. Now, the multiplier on this is that other people, and this can even include other people such as therapists, will say, well, relationships run on compromise and understanding. So most folks in narcissistic relationships will read that as, okay, I need to be more compromising and understanding. And so you create lots of complex justifications. But these people weighing in on your relationship will almost never ask, and how is the other person in the relationship holding up their side of the relationship? And that is because you may be turning to other people for guidance because you are so exhausted. Well, you're having to turn to other people because the narcissistic person is very well taken care of in your relationship because you're taking care of them. So they aren't having to run around and ask for guidance. They may still complain about you, but they are more likely to come directly at you with their attacks. You learned long ago that not only is there no point, but that there can be some risk in doing that with the narcissistic person. So the question becomes, how long, for how long can we put the sole burden of understanding onto just one person in a relationship? Most people in narcissistic relationships are empathic and flexible to a fault. It's the only way the relationship works. But it creates an illusion that the relationship works, whatever that means, because basically one person gives up everything, the other person is content, and the person doing the giving up rationalizes it as, well, they are, fill in the blank on whatever the excuse is. And if you grew up with a narcissistic parent, the idea of reciprocity in a relationship, that doesn't even exist for you. You grew up in a world of one-way streets and had no idea that any relationship could be reciprocal and balanced. What is interesting is that many people in narcissistic relationships will say, I'm good. I'm a doer. But the part that stinks is that the narcissistic person does not notice what I'm doing for them. And they don't. Nor do narcissistic people notice how much the other person in the relationship may be struggling or try to even begin to make sense of how life may be difficult for the other person in the relationship on the basis of that other person's backstory and history. For a lot of folks, the soul-crushing part of the narcissistic relationship is not the disproportionate load of having to do everything that takes a toll on them. Rather, it's the not being seen. You may be coming up with elaborate explanations for why they are always not such a great partner or family member or colleague and try to show them some grace, but that is never shown for you. You may ask for the same thing as them or make the same mistake as them, and you would be regarded with complete contempt and disdain, while when they do it, you hold space and empathy for them. How long is that sustainable for? Sadly, I have witnessed people doing this for a lifetime, but the psychological toll that it takes on you is significant. Lots of people in narcissistic relationships really get screwed because we focus on whether or not the relationship looks to be working, but never on whether both people in it are okay. And somehow, this has created a world where there are lots of relationships out there where it is one person doing the caregiving, the heavy lifting, the empathizing, the rationalizing, the supporting, and the other person just receives it all. This is why people in narcissistic relationships are exhausted, and yet they buy into a narrative that maybe this is just what relationships are. What is interesting is that many people in narcissistic family systems in particular, may have the experience of being a kid and having to cater to the narcissistic parent, and then are told that it's all about duty and obedience. And then as they get into adulthood, and they still have to cater to the narcissistic parent, and then they are told it's just respect and family. And then, as that narcissistic parent becomes elderly, they are told, well, they're old, and they're frail, and they don't know what they're doing, and they need help because they are so old. These justifications, guilt inducers, and one-sided expectations evolve with time and keep people eternally stuck in these one-sided cycles. Breaking out of these cycles is not easy. At some level, the first step is to recognize when a relationship is asymmetric and imbalanced, and that's not easy to do. Then to go a step further and recognize that it is a one-way street. And then to ask yourself and maintain realistic expectations and recognize that they will never do this for you. And if that is the case, what does it feel like to keep being the only one who is trying to make sense of excuses for them and their inability to see what you are managing in your life? Sometimes just sitting with that can help you at least stop doing as much in the relationship. And even if you don't do as much in the relationship, stop rationalizing it. Just those small actions can help you see the relationship, uncomfortably though, much more clearly. To stop all the explaining and making sense of it. Things like they had a bad day, they had a bad childhood, they weren't taught to manage their emotions, life is hard for them. Well, most narcissistic people can show up just fine, or even better than just fine, when it suits them. And listen, you ain't their therapist, because at least if you were putting up with their BS, you'd be getting paid. One person can't be the only one who is always being the explainer and the understander. And at a minimum, take some of that understanding and compassion and patience that you have with them and start showing it to yourself. Thanks again.